Hey, how are ya? Max Charlebois here, bringing you another brand new series, Idea to Reality. That being said, my fellow watchers, this brand new series covers a lot of interesting topics regarding different fan fiction scenarios, things that I've written over the past few years that you might have seen on the channel, where we're going to be breaking down a lot of these different what if episodes, things that I haven't really done behind the scenes. So if you want to get some insight on what I do, why I do what I do, and the choices that I make, then Idea to Reality is for you. But that being said, let's dive into the brand new episode. In the heat of the battle, all of the heroes tried to get rid of the gauntlet, at best. Anything to keep the gauntlet away from Thanos. Peter Parker held the gauntlet, and this turned the attention of the henchmen of Thanos towards him. Being one man against the platoon, Peter was easily overwhelmed. However, he was saved when Thor's hammer was thrown, and he attached his web to it. Peter Parker was thrown back by the blast from one of Thanos' ship. As he clutched the gauntlet while he was on the floor, Captain Marvel descended to provide help. However, in this new reality, Peter was hesitant in giving the gauntlet to Captain Marvel because he was unsure about whom to trust. He eventually gave the gauntlet to Captain Marvel, but as she flew towards the van, he attached his webs to her. In the end, Spider-Man was rocked back again by the force of the explosion. After having to combat Thanos one-on-one for the gauntlet, when it seemed like all the other heroes had been destroyed, Peter absorbed the powers of the stones, using the nanotech in his suit, and snapped his hands, even against the instructions of Tony not to. After Spider-Man had snapped his fingers, Thanos' army began to disintegrate, and the effect of the power of the stones took its toll on Peter by nearly melting his arms. Tony tried to salvage the situation using his devices. Peter was taken to the hospital to recuperate. However, since Tony wasn't dead in this timeline, he settled his differences with Steve and went with him to the various points in time to return the stones. Aunt May was in the hospital when Tony visited after the journey, and she was angry and sad about the turn of events. Tony dropped the new suit he had made for Peter Parker. Peter healed, and the events proceeded to Far From Home, with the lack of pressure to fill Tony's shoes on Peter. Also, the villain, Mysterio, would easily be annihilated with the aid of Tony and Nick Fury. The essence and importance of this breakdown series is to provide an explanation to certain events in the fanfiction that may be unexplained or seem immaterial to the plot. Out of the numerous characters alive, why did I choose to have Spider-Man to snap this time around instead of Tony Stark? One of the major reasons was because of the character's strength. Spider-Man being bitten by the radioactive spider gave him his superpowers, one of which is super strength, which was shown at various instances. Using and exploring Spider-Man's strength is something that is not easily foreseeable. This is to say that people would expect that if another person was to snap, it would be Captain Marvel who would easily withstand the blast, or Thor, or another prominent character with unquestionable god powers. Using Spider-Man shows the level of his strength and is a form of a poetic twist. Little would be expected of him at that point, so why not give him big shoes which he would fill? This is one of the reasons I made Spider-Man snap, to ensure that the least likely is given that the role which he would never have been given because of his age and experience. Another reason I made Spider-Man snap instead is to bring to the foreground the inverse situation of things. Peter was devastated after the death of Tony when he snapped. But how would Tony react after Peter did likewise? This is what the fanfiction wanted to briefly explore, to see if Tony's egotistical nature would blind his feelings for Peter. However, it is obvious that Tony cared so much for Peter, he was one of the reasons that he built the time machine. Although Tony does not suffer the emotional trauma of having to lose Peter to death, but the thought of having him permanently disfigured ranks second. Furthermore, it is in the character trait of Peter Parker to make the sporadic decisions, to prove himself. From the inception, it had been Peter's dream to be accepted as an Avenger and not seen as a kid again. Peter being a kid would feel like he needed to prove himself to be truly one of them. His feeling of not being enough or not being in par with the status of being an Avenger had been expressed by Tony when he didn't let him continue the battle in Captain America's Civil War after he was hit by Ant-Man. Also, when Peter was still attached to the ship of Ebony Maw and Tony released the nano device, he told Parker to go home. All of these instances would make Peter feel like he needed to prove himself as an Avenger. Hence, it was the logical step to make him snap in the story instead. So I'm going to be going over a few individuals that I've seen commenting things, and I do want to say this first individual, shout out to you. He says, I honestly think Spider might have survived. We already know Spider-Man is a lot more durable than Iron Man, and they both had on the same nanobot kind of suit that helped Tony absorb the radiation from the stones. So he honestly might have survived, and it would heal a lot faster due to his spider powers. Now I do want to shout out this individual. He commented this over a year ago, but because of his comment, I do want to say this is something that I thought about because I was originally going to kill off Spider-Man in the What If fanfiction, and the reason was because I thought, well, you know, the Hulk, he really had a hard time with, you know, sustaining the power of the Infinity Gauntlet. And so having a mere mortal like Spider-Man, somebody, like, although the Hulk's mortal, like, you could say Spider-Man isn't as strong as the Hulk, which, I mean, it's probably proven in so many different comic books. But I think that he most likely would have also died, but I do believe that he could have lived because of his spider powers. And although Iron Man doesn't have any actual powers other than, you know, his intellect, I think Spider-Man would have had a better chance at survival, the slightest chance that he might be able to live. So again, I do want to give this individual a massive shout out to Dom Spokes to Shop 6018. He commented this over a year ago. Someone else said at Saint Go Eyes 1808. What my question is, why didn't Doctor Strange just rewind their injuries with the time stone? Now that's a great question. Like, if Doctor Strange had seen the outcome, why wouldn't he just rewind time to where, you know, the group of heroes fight in Titan? Like, why wouldn't he just do that? Like, he knows Peter isn't supposed to snap. So I think when writing this storyline, it was interesting because Doctor Strange is such a interesting character. Him not interfering really would have made it just a little bit more better, because although he saw those realities, that wasn't the main reality that he saw. There's so many different versions of Doctor Strange out there in the multiverse, and I didn't really want to write that. I was like, well, you know, we could just have Doctor Strange reset everything, and I've done it before in certain what ifs, but I feel like Strange wouldn't have done that. I mean, if someone would have lived, I guarantee that he just would have continued on in the universe and would have been like, okay, well, we're in a different 14 million universe where the outcome is we won, but there's multiple winnings and we don't know how many there are. I want to give a shout out to that individual. That was a great question. The comments are over a year ago, so again, if you're seeing this in the future, again, I do want to say I appreciate it, but that's going to be the community shoutout of the week. If you would like to see more, I will let you know when the next videos are coming out, so you can comment about the storyline so I can mention you, because I do want to mention more of you. But again, let's continue with the video. There are some events in the What If series that I feel is unexplained and unrelated. However, it all contributes to the direction of the plot. After Peter had given Captain Marvel the gauntlet, why did he attach his webs to her legs? Why didn't he just not give it to her when she asked him for it? In the fanfiction, it had been noted that Peter was hesitant in giving the gauntlet to Captain Marvel because he didn't know whom he could trust on the battlefield. The main reason Peter felt he could not trust Captain Marvel was because he had not seen her before. This was a new person to him. It was his first time seeing her. It is a bit unclear if he saw the extent of her full powers or helping on his side. This would have been the natural reaction of someone who was a kid in a battle of life and death, and they were in control of the key, which determined what the outcome of the battle would be. Hence, I went towards the route of natural reaction. He came up with a brilliant plan of running to Tony. He attached himself to Captain Marvel to catapult himself towards Tony to ensure if he had made the right decision. Another part that may be seen as a bit unclear is the part where Tony asked Peter to absorb the powers of the stone. Normally, as Tony had instructed that he do so, Tony would have expected that Peter would snap. However, I believed that at this very moment, all Tony wanted to do was prevent Thanos from winning again. So he told Peter the necessary steps to take to absolve the Mad Titan of the stones. Also, Tony after this made an effort to stop Peter from snapping his fingers, but to no avail. When Tony visited Peter in the hospital and Aunt May slapped him, this scene is important because it makes Tony realize the gravity of what had happened to Peter. Peter was a kid who had an aunt that cared for him. Tony was responsible for Peter also, since his Aunt May knew about the scholarship program. It is one of the reasons he gifted Peter a new suit, a way to make him cope with the bruises which he had sustained and to heal quicker. Peter was under his care when he sustained such devastating injuries. It's only feasible to imagine how Aunt May felt at that point. Her nephew had been left home whole, only for her to get a call later on that he was hospitalized for a severely burned arm, even though he was under the supervision of an adult. Naturally, one would blame the adult and not the kid. Another part which seemed a bit unclear was how the events would still unravel to the timeline of No Way Home with Tony alive. The events of Far From Home are premeditated on the apparent death of Tony and the succession of Edith by Peter, which lures Quentin Beck out. However, prior to the events, Quentin had already been garnering massive publicity in another place by fighting fake villains. It would have been easy for Tony Stark and Nick Fury to find out who he was. Tony would easily decipher the combat was a Rousey due to his familiarity with gadgets. They would invite him to tell him to stop, causing fear. Tony would see him and recognize him. Quentin would reveal that he had done everything to be noticed by them, the Avengers, to which Fury would turn down his request to join them. This would cause Quentin to get angry and seek alternative routes. In his mind, he would want to create villains that are outworldly, and this would make him seek for Edith by all means. The difference here is that Spider-Man would be an extra hero, and Tony would still be in control of Edith. Quentin would eventually realize that the best way to hurt Tony was to hurt the person he cared about, which was why Peter in this case and hence he would turn all of his attention to Parker. He would eventually reveal the identity of Peter Parker in a bid to hurt Tony too. There are other things to consider, other routes, other opportunities I may have taken. For starters, it crossed my mind whether indeed Peter was strong enough to handle the gauntlet. When Bruce had used the gauntlet to bring everyone back, the effects of the radiation from the stone took a great toll on him, despite the fact that he had been previously exposed to gamma radiation. Therefore, and for an alternate non-survival of Peter can be explored. This is after Peter snapped, he dies. If this happened, the course of the Marvel Cinematic Universe would have been changed. This would be a very hard pill to swallow, considering the youthful zest of Spider-Man and how young he was. This would leave a dark and gloomy cloud over the heads of the Avengers, as they had won at the expense of a kid's life. Particularly, Tony would take the greatest hit and distance himself from the Avengers. This would lead to the post-effect of Civil War, but worse. That effect would actually cause the audience, the death of Peter Parker, it would be a wake-up call and a yank into reality. Everyone, when watching movies, are under the belief that the young, promising hero can't die. This was on a lighter note. This would mean that the events of Far From Home and No Way Home would not occur in the MCU. If the events of Far From Home had never occurred, then Peter would never have gone to Doctor Strange for the spell, which would eventually lead to the tear in reality, and the effects of the branch. In the universe, his Aunt May would be alive, grieving his demise. Furthermore, if Peter had died, Doctor Strange would never have casted the spell which broke the construct of time and reality, leading to the events of Multiverse of Madness. In the post-credit scene of Spider-Man No Way Home, Doctor Strange is seen dealing with the consequences of the spell, which he had been instructed not to cast in the first place. So it really would take a question of what would happen. So, that being said, my fellow watchers, that is going to wrap up today's video of this particular breakdown scenario, idea to reality, where you get some insight on why I wrote certain things, why I chose certain paths, and what could be learned from these different alternate realities now that we're moving forward with the channel. But that being said, if you would like to see more ideas to realities episodes and you would like to see that on the channel, do make sure to subscribe, like, share, and turn those notifications on so you and your friends are up to date with the latest content. And if you would like to be featured in these videos like these watchers were, I would highly recommend that you comment, like, share, as well as turning those notifications on, because it really goes a long way. I can actually pick and choose who I would want in the segments. But that being said, how did you enjoy this video? And I'll see you in the next one. But that being said, thank you so much for your support, and I'll see you later. Peace out.